Hello, everyone. This is New World Geopolitics here with kind of a mid-May, I guess you could say like a 2-month update on the front line. A lot of stuff has gone on. I just wanted to make sure you guys had an update from me. I know there's other people covering the war, but I feel a little inclined to at least keep up with the conflict somewhat. Pretty significant advances have been made by the Russians inside Ukraine, specifically since the end of the Ukrainian counteroffensive last summer, fall, and the start of the restart of the Russians taking the initiative. Right, so the Russians have been not necessarily conducting I guess you could say conducting an offensive, but it's more just been a general push. And in that general push, the Russians have managed to capture somewhere around 900 square kilometers. Everything you see here in the orange is everything Russia has gained since October. Now, if you want to subtract it down to the beginning of the year, it's more like 700 square kilometers, and actually those numbers are somewhat off now. I had actually done these calculations, and I'll go ahead and show you guys these numbers here, with the parentheses being January 1st of the year, how much territory the Russians held in these specific frontline regions, or how much territory the Russians had captured by the end of the year. And then this, compounding on top of that, what you see here in the brackets is the previous time I reported on this specifically, so it would have been mid-March. And then now you have, mid-May, specifically May 16th is when I did these calculations, and they're already off by, well over 20 kilometers. So you can see here 881 square kilometers is the number I got from October till now. That's probably more like 920 by this point. So the most significant gains have been in the Kharkiv region, where the Russians have, basically in the last 2 weeks just walked right in. Ukrainian defenses either weren't built right up against the border, or they were underfunded and were broken up and overrun fairly easily. Um, there's a lot to say about that Kharkiv offensive, so we'll go ahead and get into that in a few minutes. Other significant gains in the Donetsk area. The Russians have advanced a great deal beyond Avdiivka, actually capturing Okcherny, which is an industrial town, and what should have been a fairly defensible position for the Ukrainians. And the Russians managed to capture that and large swaths of land around it. And additionally, Robotny, which is in the south, has completely appears to have finally completely fallen back into Russian hands. So we're going to break all that down and get right into the individual areas of the front. All right, so in the Kharkiv region, this started as 4 different entry points for the Russians. The first being, actually, there's a small town on the border right here. The Russians also entered across the border here, on the roads going straight down Kharkiv. They entered both on the eastern and western sides of the Seversky Donetsk River. So that has since consolidated into 2 continuous fronts. And zooming in and looking at, we're going to call this the Lipsy front because it seems to be the immediate goal. The Russians took a number of Ukrainian positions. It does appear like the first Ukrainian defense line was situated somewhere around these settlements here. So not right up on the border. Towns like Zeleny, which is actually off the screen over here. I'll have to readjust that in a second. But there were some satellite images of extensive trench networks in these villages. These were overrun on the second day of the offensive, and the Russians have now started attacking towards and into Lipsy. Some of the first houses of Lipsy, specifically in these areas, are already being contested or are under Russian control. And this is everything's that's happening here is in the last 2 weeks, and in the last 4 or 5 days, this has slowed down significantly. Some people are suggesting that this is a feint on behalf of the Russians, and I mean, I'll kind of get into that in a minute. Looking at Volchansk, it does appear like Volchansk is an immediate goal for the Russians. The Russians have actually captured everything up to the river on the northern side of this river, which is this is the Volcha River, so it's different. It's a tributary feeding into the Seversky Donetsk, and recent reports are saying that the Russians have actually started to cross the river into southern Volchansk, right here in this area, actually across from a hospital. So the hospital's right here. There's recent drone footage of Ukrainian Air Force bombing the hospital, or perhaps it's Ukrainian missile forces. Is really tough to tell. So it looks like the Russians are attacking into this industrial district here. Now, looking at this front, it actually, has kind of evened out along this river. The Ukrainians have withdrawn in a lot of places across the river rather than being forced out. An important thing to note here is that the Russians do have the high ground, so the possibilities of a Russian capture of Vovchansk are pretty high at this point. They have, not only do they have the initiative, but they have significant geographic advantage in this region. Now, it is very possible that the Russians have decided that in order to protect Belgorod, a buffer needs to be somewhat created, because there has been several incursions from the Ukrainian army, or these groups operating under the Ukrainian army that claim to be Russian separatists, or whatever, have attacked into Shebkino and Novaya Tavolzhanka, into these areas last summer and the fall in the past. So creating a buffer at the river actually should have been what the Russians did to begin with. When the Ukrainian attack came in late 2022 to recapture Kharkiv, I mean, honestly, from a practical standpoint, it made no sense for the Russians to retreat beyond the Volcha River um, to the border, because there's no defenses set up at the border. These are just fields. They could have easily just set up their perimeter in Volchansk or around Volchansk and on the Volga River. But that's, ultimately that didn't happen. So the Russians might be just trying to correct that situation, capturing Volchansk, and for the rest of it, holding along the river all the way down through here, and that should create some kind of buffer for Belgrade. In terms of this being a feint, it does. I'm not sure about that, because the claim here is that Sumy is the real target. The Ukrainians are allegedly preparing for an attack on Sumy, and the Russian attacks in this direction here are really just a distraction. I don't see any immediate value for the Russians to assault Sumy, and I could be wrong on that. Sumy is a very, very, very defensible position, and try not to let the early events of the war play in for that, because in 2022, in February 2022, the Russians basically walked right in the Sumy region itself. They never did capture the city of Sumy, but they captured all the roads around it. The Ukrainians basically didn't even defend the north of Ukraine. They wanted the Russians to come in and get lost, essentially, and then let anti-tank teams pick them apart and cause attrition. It actually worked fairly well for the Ukrainians. Now, in terms of an all-out assault on Sumy, if the Ukrainians are actually going to defend it, it does have a significant shield of forest belts that prevent or cover the approaches to the city. Not only that, but the city itself is, most of the city is on the opposite side of the Psel River. So there's a fairly formidable river that defends most of the city, and it's arranged in kind of a very hilly area. So there's a lot of good defensive positions here. Let me see if I can find. So look, I mean, if you look at this, you have a steep hilltop with an industrial building on top of it, warehouses of some sort. Very, very good defensible positions all around the city. It doesn't, and there's no immediate value to taking Sumi. Like, if you wanted to use Sumi as a jumping off point into this part of Ukraine, sure, it does make a good target for the Russians, but this would be a significant force that the Russians would have to commit to this, when they're already clearly there's a lot of their troops are tied down in the Donbass, and the Donbass is clearly their primary goal at the moment. I am very skeptical of this. Now, if the target is not Sumy itself and it's actually the Sumy region, what makes a lot more sense for the Russians is to go after essentially this conglomeration of towns here to the north of Konotop, which is down here. I don't think Konotop would be in this goal. This would give the Russians a buffer leading into Kursk and Bryansk regions, which are, up here. So, part of the Russian core, long-standing. Well, actually, here's Kursk right here, but Bryansk is further to the north here. So, um, once upon a time, this was the core of Russia. Now it's borderlands. I mean, that certainly makes Vladimir Putin and the Russian military fairly nervous. And Ukrainian, missile strikes or drone strikes, or even, special forces sabotage groups moving across the border, is probably making the population somewhat nervous as well. So attacking into this region and taking these settlements and these road crossings, would do a lot. It would extend the front line. Essentially, the front line isn't necessarily along the border right now. There's if I had to guess, I would say both sides have screening forces there, where there's fortifications on both sides, but they're fairly lightly manned and spread out, and their job is basically to delay any kind of crossing until, the big guns show up. So, if the Russians do decide to cross the border in another place, they're going to have to move significant reserves there, thousands of troops, which is going to force the Ukrainians to move thousands of troops there to counter it. So, that would be the primary goal of any Russian incursion across the northern border, at this time, would be to draw Ukrainian forces out of the Donbass and force them to defend these areas. Now, a major assault on a major city like Chernihiv, Sumy, Kharkiv, um, in my opinion, completely out of the question for now, probably until 2025, if it happens at all. I just don't see it. There's quite a bit of work that needs to happen in Kharkiv. I think it's definitely a secondary goal for the Russians here to, once they get established and they have a jumping off point, then they can actually think about, moving across border, taking Veliki Burlik, maybe trying even to get to Chigoyev and Balaklia, doing a reverse counteroffensive. The main goal of this would be Kupiansk, to reverse the Ukrainian gains in 2022 here. But at the moment, based on the pace of this Russian offensive, I'm really not seeing it. Perhaps I'm wrong, and in a week or two, we're going to see some major cross-border incursion, and a push towards Veliki Burlik, but there's no longer an element of surprise here. I mean, the element of surprise worked, fairly well. The Russians captured 107 square kilometers here and 155 square kilometers here. This is nearly the same amount of territory the Ukrainians captured in their summer offensive last year, and they did it inside of 2 weeks. So, definitely surprised the Ukrainians, but I don't see major compounding gains off of this, at least at the moment. Maybe something will change by next week. All right, looking at everything else we've missed in the last couple weeks, the Russians still continue to, adjust and slowly advance on Kupiansk from this direction, perhaps looking for some kind of, advantage that can be gained while the Russians are, or while the Ukrainians are occupied in the north. And you're going to see a trend here with the colors of the front lines. Right now, I have May gains as yellow on yellow. I have April gains that we've missed in the past as red line, yellow fill, and then I have what we missed in March as red line, red fill. So, small gains here towards turning in March. Very recent gains here, actually in the last couple days on Bilogorovka. The Russians trying to adjust their positions there. Continued gains on Seversk in the south, and this is actually fairly interesting if you look at the overall picture of Seversk. There's actually been quite a bit of gains in this direction. At one point, at the beginning of the year, the Russians had taken about 14 square kilometers. They're up to about 35 here since October. So, slow, steady progress on Seversk. Go ahead and get rid of that. In the Chasiv Yar direction, Bogdanovka has completely been captured now. Ivanovska has been completely captured. And Chasiv Yar has now been entered into. And this will be an interesting segment of the front line. Some, Ukrainian generals have made some statements about how most of their, combat ready, combat effective troops are actually in the region of Chasiv Yar defending it. I'm not sure of the difficulty level of this because it is on a hilltop, so it should be fairly defensible, and it is a built-up settlement with commie blocks and high rises and stuff. But the approaches are covered by forests that the Russians have already entered into. So a lot of the advantages of the hilltop and the high ground are negated by the shielded or the shadowed approach of the Russians. So Kalinina and then this Cross Canal district are probably going to fall pretty easily into Russian hands, as well as some of these areas to the north once those fall. So, it depends really on if Russia's looking to capture Chasiv Yar this year, they might have the resources to do it. I guess we'll see. But I think the main goal here by the end of the year is to put Konstantinivka in some kind of stress or pressure or threat of capture. Because if we move on further to the south here to Oxchurny, you can start to see a pocket that's forming here around Toretsk, Konstantinivka. So if the Russians can actually manage to move up this road in this direction significantly, capture some of these long time strongholds like New York, then it's going to put a lot of pressure on the Ukrainian army. So, Oxchurny was a pretty significant collapse for the Ukrainians, and still not exactly sure how the Russians managed that. I know day by day how it happened. They kind of had advanced up the rail line, had captured some trench networks here around Novo Kalinove, Karamik, and had used that as a jumping off point into Oxchurny. And once they got into Oxchurny, they quickly ballooned out, capturing Novo Bakhmutovka, Solovyova, and then Novo Kalinove, Karamik. Arkhangelsk is the most recent one, and this is quite a hefty piece of territory that's fallen into their hands. Continuing down to the south, Semenivka, Berdichi fell in April. Umanske is still somewhat contested, but this is inside of May. A lot of these fields and the remainder of Pervomaysk fell in April. Nedolove is more recent. That's in the month of May. It's looking to me like clear Russian goal when you look at it from this direction is Seladove and then Pokrovsk. So Seladove, really, really big crossroads. I believe rail line goes through there. Very important settlement. I think that's going to be more or less the near-term goal. But it seems like the Ukrainians will have somewhat of a pretty strong defense line moving across this axis here. It actually gets significantly weaker toward the northern side of it because you don't really have lakes and rivers defending it as well. But this particular stretch of it to the south should be somewhat formidable for the Russians to cross. The Ukrainians did manage to recapture Novelske. So that's a positive for them. Krasnogorovka, pretty much disaster has struck here. The Ukrainians have balanced it out somewhat, but too much of the city, too much of the industrial zones have fallen into Russian hands. The settlement's definitely going to fall at some point in the summertime, which was, this is a significant town. 16,000 people, very built up settlement, high rises, industrial zone, which is all pretty much already fallen into Russian hands. There is still one block of high rises that's kind of the cornerstone of the Ukrainian defense. That is right here. But it's already surrounded from three different sides. So the Russians have moved their focus away from here because of what's going on in Kharkiv, but they're slowly starting to come back. Like this particular zone, and then this zone up here to the north was captured in the last 2 or 3 days. Moving on to the south, Grigorovka, some assaults happened here in late March. Some expansion of the front line in April. Novobakhmutovka completely fell to the Russians in April, and this small settlement, Perska Kievka, is now contested. Some territory to the south of that has fallen just in the last couple days. Well, excuse me, couple days it seems. Some Russian advances and assaults on Staromayorsk and Ugrozhny, advancing once again on Velika Novoselka. It seems, I'm not sure if this is an immediate goal, but it seems like definitely another point of pressure where the Russians are trying to spread out Ukrainian reinforcements. Some recent activity around Guliapol, but it's some stuff that already have marked. So either the Ukrainians had recaptured this and the Russians had retaken it, but the claim here is that the Ukrainians once again retreated from this zone. So, you know, tough to tell. And then in the month of May, several sources once again confirming Robotny has fallen back into Russian hands, which, this has been very back and forth. Even when the Ukrainians were first entering into Robotny, the Russians were counterattacking and recapturing large parts of it. So it's tough to tell if this will last here. All right, so just some wrapping up stuff. It's important to note that with the Kharkiv region, um, a big piece of evidence to suggest that fight isn't going well for Ukraine. Other than the rapid loss of territory there. I mean, it's a pretty big chunk of territory. Ukraine has actually sacked the general in charge of the Northern Front and replaced him. They actually replaced him with the guy that was in charge of the recapture of the Kherson region that's on the western bank of the Dnieper River. The Russians basically fired their defense minister. Oh gosh, I don't know why I'm blanking on his name. Mongolian looking guy. I can't remember his name for some reason right now. He's not really been fired. He's been moved to a technically higher post within the Russian government, but he has nothing to do with the military anymore. Very corrupt guy, if you ask me. What it's just bothering me. I gotta look up his name. Minister. Sergei Shoigu, Jesus Christ, I don't know why I couldn't remember his name, but Shoigu probably was embezzling an absolute shit ton of military funds, for the 13 years that he was in charge of the military. And his replacement now is actually this Andrei Belousov. He's an economist. Um, that might seem surprising, but the defense, Sergei Shoigu wasn't a soldier either. Um, the position is less tactics and strategy and more management of the military in general, which encompasses a lot of financials. You dealing with thousands or millions of employees, so it's paying people, it's logistics, it's a lot of logistics, it's purchasing, and there's industry involved. It's actually a fairly good job for an economist to take over, in my opinion. Although Belousov is a Keynesian economist, uh, as opposed to a classical economist, which I don't want to get into the difference, but I hate Keynesians. Um, so I mean, he's probably an idiot in my opinion, as they all are. So it seems like the Russians are pushing towards getting their money organized, and this is another play for the long run. I think it doesn't have much to do with current activity on the front line. If you were going to say that it has to do with current activity on the front line, I would say that it ties into this new U.S. Aid package that has been passed. We kind of predicted that it would eventually happen, but the amount is the same as it was in the last one, which I did not predict. I thought that there would be a reduced amount, but it's 60 billion, which actually it probably is reduced because this time it's 60 billion split between Ukraine, the U.S., and Israel this time. So it is less funds for Ukraine, but also um, a lot of the year has already passed up. So it might be the case that the Russian military wasn't able to achieve the gains that it would have liked to have achieved while Ukraine was struggling for resources. So now that this package has been passed, Ukraine has the resources and the capacity to buy more weapons, pay more troops, et cetera, et cetera. It put up a better fight. So it's possible that maybe Putin's looking at the situation, well, like, wow, we really squandered an opportunity here. We had a 4-month window where they didn't have any money or any ammo. And while they did make significant gains, you know, 700 plus square kilometers of gains in that time period through some densely fortified territory, I might add. I think perhaps like a major assault somewhere that to capture a city like Kupiansk or something would have been more preferable. It would have been more bang for the buck, perhaps. But clearly Ukraine's defenses aren't that weak at the moment. I mean, it seems like they're significantly weaker than they've ever been, since April of 2022. But still not potential for major Russian incursions as of today. All right, guys, that's it for me on this one. And hopefully I'll have another update for you guys in a week or so. I'm gonna try to do a little bit better keeping up with these. So thanks for sticking around. I'll see you next time.